I'm open.
My layup is wet like Steph Curry's.
Everyone loves the Warriors, but what we wanted to know is if you need a star point guard like me.
Or a post player like me.
So that brings us to our study. Is having a star point guard necessary to win an NBA championship? So for some background, we got data from basketballreference.com, which uses official NBA box scores, and we took the data from the starting point guards of the last 30 NBA champions, so from 1988 to 2017. We didn't include years before that, even though there were NBA champions before 1988, because if we had added on another decade, it would have gone past 1981, which is when the three-point shot was introduced. So it would have added data that could have possibly skewed our results because the game was different. So here's a picture of the data that we compiled. We took each championship winning team, their starting point guard, where their scoring rank, so if they were the leading scorer or the third leading scorer, their regular season scoring average, their postseason scoring average, whether or not they were an all-star, their regular season assists per game average, and their postseason assists average.
For our scoring rank, we decided to do a one proportion z-test to answer the question, are the majority of starting point guards on championship teams the team's leading scorer? So for our null hypothesis, we put a majority or 50% of starting point guards on championship teams are the leading scorer. And for our alternative hypothesis, we put less than the majority of standing point guards on the championship teams are the leading scorer. And we were able to satisfy all the conditions except for the last one, which is where NP was only 5 and less than 10. So we decided to proceed with caution. And after we did our test, we came out with a p of 1.32 times 10 to the negative fourth. So with a small p-value, we were able to reject the null hypothesis and conclude that we have found sufficient evidence to disprove the claim that a majority of NBA championship winning point guards lead their team in scoring.
One of the key questions we were considering during our study was whether do starting point guards on NBA championship teams actually increase their scoring output in the playoffs. To address this question, we decided to conduct a two-sample t-test with a null hypothesis that the point guards on NBA championship teams don't increase their average scoring output during the playoffs, and our alternative that they do increase their scoring output. To test this, we looked at the set of conditions to determine whether a two-sample t-test could be done. The first condition we looked at is normality, where we found that the relatively large dataset of 30 allowed us to go ahead. The second condition we looked at was independence, where we found that one scoring output doesn't necessarily have an impact on another scoring output. The third condition we looked at was randomness, where we found that these samples weren't really random since they were a census of the past 30 teams. And the last condition we looked at is a 10% condition, where we saw that 30 is less than 10% of all NBA point guards over a span of time. Now to the calculations. To conduct a 95% confidence interval for the scoring output, we first found the means of 12.96 and 13.7, and standard deviations of 5.23 and 6.12. With this data, we were able to find a t-score value for the means, which of 0.503. With this t-score value, we were able to calculate the confidence interval of negative 2.20 to 3.68. This confidence interval indicates that with 95% confidence, we can say that the scoring averages of NBA championship point guards will change by between a 2.20 point per game decrease and a 3.68 point per game increase. Since 0 is included in the interval, we fail to reject the null hypothesis, and we don't find a statistically significant evidence that there has been a consistent increase in scoring averages.
So now I'll be talking about all-stars. So we started with a second test, which is a one proportion z-test. For the z-test, we asked, do a majority of NBA championship winning teams have an all-star point guard? For our null hypothesis, we said less than 50% of championship teams have a point guard who was an all-star. Our alternative hypothesis was that more than 50% of championship teams have a point guard who was an all-star. As for our conditions, we checked the conditions that the data is categorical. the number of successes is 7 and the number of failures is 23, and therefore we proceed with caution due to a small sample size. In addition, 30 is less than 10% of all NBA point guards, but this data is a census of the past 30 championship point guards. So the point guards that we're looking at who are all-stars are Magic Johnson from the 88 Lakers, Isaiah Thomas during the 89 and 90 Pistons, Tony Parker during the 07 and 14 Spurs, and Stephen Curry during the 2015 and 2017 Warriors. And then we have the other non-all-star point guard, which are 23, which makes the proportion of all-stars from our samples 7/30. So after plugging in all the values into our z-test, we come to a p-value of 0.00179, and with this low p-value of 0.00179, we can reject the null hypothesis because we have sufficient evidence to conclude that the majority of NBA championship winning point guards are not all-stars.
But maybe some point guards aren't as good at scoring as Steph Curry, so during the playoffs, they prefer to pass to their teammates. Test, we looked at if point guards who aren't scoring as much during the playoffs were focusing on other parts of the game, like if their assist averages increased during the playoffs. So our null hypothesis was championship point guards whose scoring averages decreased during the playoffs did increase their assist averages, and our alternative was that championship point guards whose scoring averages decreased during the playoffs did not increase their assist averages. So to check our conditions, regular season assist per game was normal, but playoff assist per game is skewed a little bit to the right, but that's largely because our sample size of 10 was really small. However, it is less than 10% of all NBA point guards during the time period, and the samples are independent. The biggest thing with this part of our study is that the sample size is only 10, so it's not a conclusive result. However, we decided to proceed, and you can see the math there, and we found that with 95% confidence, the assist per game average of players whose scoring output decreased during the playoffs changes by between a 1.47 assist per game decrease and a 0.69 assist per game increase. 0 was included in our confidence interval, so we lack sufficient evidence to reject the null hypothesis, and thus there is no statistically significant increase or change at all in assists per game. All 4 of our tests concluded against the assumption that having a star point guard is necessary to win an NBA championship, and there is some uncertainty in what we found because of our relatively small sample size, especially with the last part since it was only 10 point guards. And the only way that we could really improve on this part of our study would be to wait until there have been more NBA championships during the three-point era, and we can't really do much until then, so we made the best of what we could with a limited sample size.